All right, the first one here is, yes, my best friend was a dreamer, part 1. I'll start with a quote here that you've heard before in the journals, but here it is again. Quote, "Time is short and art is long. It seems to me that you should let yourself be instructed. Associate yourself with some poet and let that gentleman's thoughts go roving. Have him heap all noble qualities upon your honored pate, the lion's courage, the stag's fleetness, the Italian's fiery blood, the northerner's steadfastness. Let him find for you the secret of combining magnanimity and cunning, and how with warm youthful desires you can fall in love in accordance with a plan." End quote. It's a quote from Mephistopheles, who is the devil, of course, in von Goethe's Faust. Okay, page 1. Again, yes, my best friend was a dreamer, part 1. And note that I'm gonna try to read this a little bit quicker than usual, a little bit more quickly, because I see the narrator as being a little bit worked up, a little bit tense. But here we go. Before the internet, before DVDs, and before Tiger Woods, there was only Herman America. My name is David, and Herman Captain America was my best friend. Before we start the story, I should tell you a few important details that Herman never mentioned, or didn't get the chance to. Most importantly, that he's gone now, missing, disappeared. Poof! Herman vanished without a trace back in late '94. The official word is that Herman was in a small car that slid off a snowy cliff in Colorado. But, and not surprising to me, his body never turned up with the others. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. I want to introduce my friend Herman to you and to anyone else who might not know him, because I have to, in case you never get to do it for yourself. In a minute, I'll tell you about the things Herman has done and about what happened in Colorado. I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of things, and then before long, you'll get to hear from the man himself, from this one very unique American kid. If you lend the two of us an ear for a little while, you'll hear just about everything. First, I'll give you my big introduction with a capital I. Or both my introductions, as it turns out. In a way, my two introductions add up to something like a mini biography of Herman. But they're nothing compared to what Herman says for himself later on. The real reason we're here. Very careful, very eloquent, very honest. The stuff at the end is straight from Herman's historic personal journals. And periodically I'll pull a few excerpts, but only a few, to save paper of course, but also so you don't have to read the entire thing twice, and so I don't just up and kill you with Herman right off the bat. Oh, and I should mention that Herman was only 20 when he began all this business, and now, years later, if he's still alive, Herman would be somewhere into his 32nd year. A precocious son of a bitch, indeed he was. So here, come quickly. Like that scene in the King Arthur legend when young Arthur is told to pull the sword out of the stone for a second and final time. Let the boy try, let the boy try. And then, with a little help from Merlin, young Arthur became king. Well, with Herman, we're talking about a guy who actually figured out the meaning of life and wrote it down in rather convincing terms. Herman moved to southwestern Colorado about 3 months before the accident. One of the last entries in the journals is from just days before he was reported missing. He'd been hitchhiking in and out of Telluride for several months, getting to and from work, and you'll see that as the winter weather started to get bad, he made note of which kinds of drivers he trusted more than others. He told me over the phone about how Colorado license plates are always better. It means the driver probably has at least some experience with the snow and black ice. Herman described some of the drivers who picked him up, some that came from warmer climates and had only recently migrated up or out to the San Juan Mountains. He wrote a bit about a woman from South Carolina, who was later questioned, who had lived in Telluride for less time than he had, which means that she may have pulled into town for the very first time just before she picked Herman up that day. Anyway, Herman was apparently uncomfortable in her small car, some lipstick-colored Korean compact, which is far from what you might call designed for the mountains. Here's an excerpt. She said, "All my friends tell me I drive too fast, but I'm a city driver, and I can never get anywhere fast enough. I just can't slow down, you know, old habits. I'm probably making you nervous, huh?" And while she drove, she stared at me and nodded the road ahead. We were winding down valley, nearing the part of the highway where it climbs to a few hundred feet above the San Miguel River, winding without guardrails past the cars and pickups careening loosely in the outside lane back from Saw Pit and Placerville, just past the scenic lookout and the sign for the Uncompahgre National Forest. She talked and chewed gum together, and she kept looking over at me. Perhaps because she was taught that it's impolite to speak to someone without looking at them. And she had a kind of mischievous grin on her face that seemed to be wondering whether perhaps my visible signs of fear could be translated as signs of arousal. Instead of keeping eye contact, I went for the side window and ran my eyes over the rocky outcrops and aspens at the same speed the car was passing them. Do you remember purposely blurring your eyes as a child? That's what I was doing, and for the same reasons I did it as a kid. Because the road ahead wasn't what I wanted to look at, to forfeit foreknowledge and responsibility. It was just a 50-mile-an-hour blur of colors, first close, then further into the hill colors, all the shades of the same red dirt, and aspen skeletons and bare winter groupings, using each other to appear foliated, in between the clay bulwarks of the north hillside. So much more peace of mind comes with looking through the flat side window, instead of through the shield ahead, into the almost certain doom of the 200-foot future. Today I decided that if I'm going to die a passenger in a car, I want to do it looking over my right shoulder. I want to go out seeing everything, but just barely, as it races by me like a life, evenly, but too quickly to do anything but blindly stare. Here's a note from the editors. The passage from the journals was deemed too long to include in its entirety. Despite the objections of our esteemed narrator, we have shortened the passage in the interest of both brevity and entertainment value. It is in the opinion of these editors that the passage became repetitive and indeed a tad sophomoric in its subsequent pages. We pick up again with the narrator, Mr. David. That's one of the last entries in the copy of the journals that Herman gave me. The day I received them in the mail was apparently the day his housemates reported him missing. They said 3 full days after he didn't come home for dinner. I say 3 days after Herman went into hiding. When I called and asked them about it, a week had passed. They still were not too concerned. They said they were pretty used to being ignored by him, and that this would probably prove to be no different. They felt more insulted than worried. A small backpack of Herman's was found, and the Telluride town sheriff returned it to his apartment. The sheriff said it was found by a towing crew that was pulling a wrecked car up from a deep ravine near Ophir, a small ghostly mining town just west of Telluride, only 45 minutes from a remote backdoor entrance into Utah. The bag was found hanging from the low branch of an aspen tree adjacent to where the car had gone off the road. There were 2 burned-up bodies in the burned-up car, and the sheriff assumed that the bag in the tree belonged to one of the dead. Well, the 2 in the front seats were both identified, and neither was Herman. What happened with the accident was strange. The ravine out at Ophir drops off hundreds of feet, and the cars run down the side of it triggered a substantial avalanche that buried the back of the car while the front burned. This is what the sheriff's report explained. One thing that remains unexplained is how the back door on the passenger side had come open, either during or after the car's plunge in Ophir's quiet, craggy, sunless valley of death. Either during or after the car's plunge in Ophir's quiet, craggy, sunless valley of death. So what did the picture look like? One car half burned and half buried in snow, with one door opened wide where the snow cover-up was not as deep. One bag belonging to Herman hanging in a tree at the top of the ravine, with 2 Bic pens and a spiral notebook inside. And what does the sheriff want to say happened to the missing Herman? He was ejected through the open door, which incidentally, he argues, opened up itself, and he was buried in the avalanche off to the left of the car where the slide accumulated to significant depths. So Herman America was buried in an avalanche after being thrown from a speeding car, falling into a ravine, with his bag mysteriously hanging from a tree branch up by the road? I don't think so. The sheriff said the bag must also have been ejected from the car. I don't think so. In fact, I beg to differ. Let me tell you what really happened out there on Highway 145 near the town of Ophir in southwestern Colorado. Herman survived. First, he realized the car was out of control, so he gathered his wits and figured out what he might be able to save, if not himself. Then he grabs the bag carrying his new journal, opens the window, and hurls the bag with all his might as the car begins to lose its footing at the top of the ravine. He executed a perfect frisbee-like bag toss up into an aspen tree where it would be guaranteed to find her, and then he prepared for the plunge. The car fell to the bottom fast. The engine block and the front seats erupted into flames, and the snow coming down behind them buried most of the car's backside except for the door, which Herman proceeded to use to step out into oblivion. Herman hiked off into the sunset and into hiding, quickly improvising and capitalizing on an opportunity for a faked death. Beautiful. The sheriff said there were no footprints, but that, of course, could easily be explained by fresh powder and wind. How the car burned up so quickly with all that snow around is a bit of a mystery. But then again, Herman did mention how dry the air is out there. He joked once about how easily their house would go up if the wood stove was to spit something out onto all the newspapers and bark scraps lying around. He said that one time he just happened to turn around to face the stove as he was walking away from it, and he noticed a tiny red ember under the bookcase, about the size of a Sony Walkman battery indicator light. He said he left only the screen covering the fire, and something told him to turn and check it when he heard a snap, crackle, and pop. Well, what did his little second glance do? It noticed the little red glow that would have burnt my house to the ground. Herman said he spotted the little red devil roosting on their old-fashioned wicker broom lying on the floor under the bookcase and right next to their paper bag full of shavings for kindling. If it were me, I wouldn't have turned to check the fire that second time. I would have been outside somewhere with a stereo up, and I wouldn't have noticed a fire until it was licking at my sideburns. What would I have done? I probably would have died trying to unplug my stereo, or at least been severely burned, henceforth resigned to live the rest of my life as a scarred, crippled mess, and without a stereo to show for it. Anyway, Herman said fires catch pretty easily out there. However, I'm sure that if it was my job to get the fire going every night, I wouldn't be able to get the matches to work. I could probably burn down a whole city block in a rainforest without blinking, but put me in a room full of newspaper, wood shavings, and kerosene-soaked logs, and I'd probably freeze to death that night. No, again, I probably wouldn't die. I'd just lose my fingers and face a frostbite, and then live the rest of my life as a goddamn self-inflicted casualty. The truth is that it seems just as likely that Herman will die from jumping out of a plane at 105 as it is that he died in some car-triggered avalanche. Fate, destiny, doom are things that can't touch Herman. Fate, destiny, doom are things that can't touch Herman. No outside forces have a chance against them. Herman does all the pulling and all the pushing in his world, just like any superhero would be expected to.